Welcome. I'm J. Michael Silver, and this is Foundational Steps, the show, where I talk with people about the choices they've made and how they got where they are in life now. In this episode, I'm talking with Victor Cabral. He is the Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs for Fluence Training. Fluence, for those of you who don't know, is on the cutting edge of psychedelic therapy and training. We talk about his first psychedelic experience, trauma, philosophy, and a lot more. Victor has a very long and impressive resume as a therapist and a social worker. Make sure to check out the show notes for all of the links to him and the documentary that he's currently producing. Please support the show by leaving a comment or a review. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And check out our affiliate links in case there's something that might be valuable to you. Enjoy our conversation. Awesome, Victor. Welcome to the show. Glad we finally got to do this.
Yeah, for sure. It took a while, but we
figured it out. All right. So in your own words, how would you define where you're at in your life right now? Like, who you are, what you're doing, just in kind of like the short, blink at a blink.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I can't even answer that question when they let me like ramble for a while, but I think I'm just at heart, I'm a healer, I'm an advocate, and the work that I'm doing professionally really allows me to dive into that work, to dedicate myself to that work, and I'm just kind of that, right? And trying to find balance with also being a human being and being a father, being a husband and community member. And those, for me, all of those things kind of are all interrelated. And so that's really what I am.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Okay, so that actually kind of leads perfect into, the prime question. Given that you are so multifaceted and you're engaged in all these different aspects of your life, family and work and everything else. When was the first moment, in your life through, in the development to get where you're at now, that you really had an awareness that you were in your body, that you were conscious, that the choices you were making actually impacted and affected the reality around you?
Yeah, I think definitely my first psilocybin experience was kind of an awakening for me. I had spent so much of my life dissociating, and my 20s and my years in undergraduate, which were 8 years total, right? With me trying to finish school.
Right.
There was like my, from my, say, the time I was probably a kid until I had that first psilocybin experience when let's see, about 6 years ago. So, and I'm 34. So that would have been like when I was 26. So I feel like that entire time I was kind of like just living in this cloud. And that was the first time that I realized like, oh, there's more to life. There's more to who I am. And I have a choice. I have agency to be able to kind of make life the best thing that it can be for me and for those around me that I love.
So you're making psilocybin, or some people would know it by magic mushrooms, sound incredibly sane and almost banal. So just to kind of give a little bit of context for that, was this, people talk about a heroic dose. Got something in my eye, sorry. People talk about heroic dose, like a big dose where you lay down, you put a blindfold on, and you disappear. Was it one of those experiences, or was it a little bit more in your body, a little bit more subdued, something where you were actually looking at the world around you?
Yeah, so it was just a standard dose and I split it, right? So I
Mhm.
for safety, it was my first time, so I took
Yeah.
half and then I took the other half like after an hour or so when I was like, okay, this is manageable.
Yeah.
Um and yeah, I was like looking in the mirror and like, kind of like looking at my hands, and it was like this really uh novel experience of like experiencing myself for the first time in that way. I wasn't in nature or outside. I was in a safe environment indoors
Hmm.
in a bedroom. But yeah, it was a standard dose. So 3.5 grams.
Yeah.
And
No, I like how you say you were in a safe environment. Because I kind of feel like safe, regardless of, imbibing a substance or being sober or meditating or whatever is so subjective. I think, everyone, what safe is for people and where they're safe. So it's interesting that you were safe in your apartment, at home. So were you by yourself?
no, I had so my wife was aware. Like I had
Okay.
made my wife aware that I was, I'd been talking about it for a while, and I had waited till I felt like it was the right time. And so, I let my wife know, hey, I'm gonna go in the bedroom, um,
And was
and
she
I guess that's what
supportive?
was safe about it. Like she knew,
Yeah.
and I had spent like a year researching and understanding like it's probably not a good idea to take an entire dose right away, especially if you're not with someone who is able to respond in terms of knowing how to guide you, right, out of a difficult situation. So yeah. Um,
Did Was she supportive? Did she have any experience or did she have any idea like what you were going to do?
no, I think she kind of knew, like, I mean, she didn't have any experience with psychedelics and
Hmm.
probably had never even really
Considered it.
understood them until I
Yeah.
started talking about them. But she was supportive in that I spent such a long time doing research, and I would share with her like, at the time I was in therapy. I'm still in therapy, but at the time I was letting her know like I feel like this is something that's gonna help me be a better person. And so she didn't understand it, but there's a lot of things throughout our 17 years together that she didn't quite understand, but she just kind of like trusted me and supported me.
Fair.
So I think that was
No,
another instance where that was the case.
that's amazing though. I mean, I think that also speaks to the strength of the communication and the relationship you have, because even if she doesn't understand something, she trusts you. My fiance and I feel like we've only been together for 3 years, but I feel like we've developed a level of trust and a level of, transparency with each other where if I said, I'm going to do an incredibly high dose of psychedelics, or whatever, and I just want you to know because I don't know where I'm going. I'm going to be in the bedroom, but I may or may not be there. Um, she'd be fine. She would understand. And, look at me, bring me water, or, whatever I needed, kind of thing. Um, so I think it's an amazing thing, especially at 26, to have a partner that uh, you were that comfortable with and that open with, that you could share that, because I don't think most people you know, in your early 20s, mid 20s, even late 20s have that kind of transparency with their partner. Um, so give give me an idea, what was the difference between being in your body in that moment and say, well, before I ask that, was there any moment prior to that, whether you're 4 years old or 15 years old or whatever, that you previously had thought like, oh yeah, I'm a human, I'm doing this thing, my name is Victor and I'm alive? Like, was there any moment prior to that that previously you would have pointed to had you not had that experience?
I don't think so. I mean, the
Hmm.
closest I think that I had is and this has gone away for me since now. I actually was thinking about this the other day, but I have uh, you know those what do they call those videos where people whisper?
Oh, the ASMR.
ASMR. So I've had that like without listening to these
Hmm.
videos. Like when I found that, I was like, oh, I'm not crazy. I'm not the only person that like experiences this. But I do remember as a child and even as an adult having these moments where I would be really in a conversation with someone or learning something new or and I would get this feeling of or listening to music. That would happen a
Hmm.
lot with music, um, where I would get this like very visceral, I don't even know if that's a word, but very like embodied kind of sensation that
Yeah.
would really bring me into like the moment. But other than that, and I didn't even recognize it, right? Like I felt it and it felt cool, but I didn't even know how to make sense of it. Other than that, I feel like because of the environments that I grew up in and the trauma that I experienced,
Hmm.
I was uh I was always in my head like I'm an idealist. I'm a like fantasy. So I uh now as an adult have learned how to really hone that in and but as a child and even as a young adult,
Hmm.
that was my like escape from reality.
Would you feel comfortable sharing, some of the trauma just so that anyone that might be listening, that has a similar experience is able to kind of key in or get some perspective? Would you be comfortable sharing any of those, even in broad strokes, any of those traumas?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so there's some things that my mom has shared with me. There's some things that I remember. So my mother's a first generation immigrant from Dominican Republic. And
Mm.
so you know, she got a third grade education and then had to work in the countryside. And so she came here with nothing, and that alone, right, is intergenerational. It carries through.
Hmm.
Um, but as a child living in New York City, like my mom and dad both worked, but we spent a lot of times with like babysitters and according to my parents, as much as I can remember, uh, where I was like hit by other kids or like, you know, my face would be really scratched up and stuff like that when I was a toddler. But some of the things that I experienced as a kid were like my, so my aunt used to live in the building in New York City. You have buildings like that kind of, and then you have like a courtyard in the center. So if there's a different building, you can kind of look out the window and see across.
Right.
She lived directly across from us, and I would like look out the window, and there would be like drug dealers in the courtyard that would like shoot their guns, and at
Inside the
one point
courtyard between the buildings, they were shooting their guns.
shooting their guns like up, right, or testing them. I don't know what they were doing, but
Right.
my mom, like I used to always poke my head out the, like, you know, New York has like those things on the windows so you don't fall out,
Right.
and call my aunt, and my head was sticking out the window and the bullet hit the top of the windowsill and landed on the dinner table. Um,
Wow.
and in
That
that
feels like
same,
a really close call.
yeah, yeah. And I can't remember, but I imagine my mom's reaction to that. Another thing that happened in that same building was my mom would lock the door and then we would walk up to the roof and then walk over to my aunt's house so she could drop me off there so I could get babysat. And one day she locked the door. This I do have recollection of
Hmm.
in some ways. And I went ahead of her while she was locking the door. And this woman on the, she was probably going through like a psychotic episode,
Hmm.
tied me up and held scissors to my neck and was going to throw me
Off of the
um,
roof.
off of the roof, and that was like a whole thing with my mom getting her off of me, and then the police came and arrested her or took her somewhere. Those were some of the things when I was real young. But then as I got older, just like growing up in poverty, my parents like trying to provide and
Mhm.
not really being able to be engaged in the way that they probably hoped they could be. Um, and then just you know, experiencing or witnessing domestic issues and violence, and you know, growing up in an environment where, like, my friends and I joke about this now, but it's kind of like as we're processing our traumas, like we would be playing basketball and there would be a drive-by and we'd all like lay down on the ground until the shooting stopped and then get up and be like, all right, who has game point? You know, so like
Yeah.
um
I mean, it's horrific that, any kid would be by, any type of, gun violence like that. But for it to be so normal that you get down to the ground, it's pass and get back up. Okay, who's got point? I mean, that's a pretty, that's a big statement. I feel like that's something that people really have to, absorb, that that's America. That's, what, most people say it's the greatest country on earth. Well, we're not going through war in this country, technically. However, on a daily basis, kids experience that. And I feel like that's something people need to grasp, that it's happening in their own country. uh, because you may live in Nebraska or Idaho or whatever, and you hear about the big city, but that's America. Like, and that's millions of people experiencing that on a daily basis. That's I think that's a big deal that, people need to be aware of.
and how can you be in your body when these things are constantly happening around you? Like, so, you know, growing up as a teenager, it's like I would hear like drug deals would happen like in my alleyway, like where I grew up, and like people would get beat up for money and be like wailing outside in the middle of the night, and I'm like 15 and I have to go to school the next day, you know. So like, and there's a bunch more stuff that's more personal and like family and things like that. um but there was no benefit to me being in my body through those experiences, right?
Right.
So I learned how to just kind of like detach.
Disassociate,
Yeah.
distance. So comparing then some of the moments where you were in your body, or it sounds like the psychedelic, the psilocybin experience, um was an incredibly positive experience of being in your body, where it sounds like a lot of the other moments were either not positive or were hyper specific to just a weird sensory experience, like, you brought up the ASMR. Would Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah. And then, you know, physical, like being in your body because you feel pain, right? Like
Yeah.
so that's how we were disciplined, right? Sometimes very harshly, or sometimes in our environment like, things would happen where you experience violence, you know. So
Yeah, it was interesting. When I was a little kid, I didn't experience drive-by shootings. I don't think I was even aware of that reality within, the country kind of thing as a real thing, until probably college, um, where I met people um, that really had personal experience. They were either, in gangs, um, or, where they grew up. I would go into DC as a kid, but, at 14, well, I guess 15, I started going into DC to go to, clubs and stuff like that. Um, but for whatever reason, I just never saw any real violence. Like, I would see the poverty, but I wouldn't see or have to deal with, guns and so forth. In my school, my high school, um, it was a little bit more real, but it was still, it still wasn't real to me. You know what I mean? Like my high school was, um, I think we were second to last in Fairfax County for testing, and we're number one or number two for violence and guns and drugs. And so it was around, but like you didn't see it in your face. And like a couple people that I knew that were supposedly in gangs, I knew them since like elementary school. So it was like it didn't resonate with like what you see on TV, or your experience of actually seeing the drug deals go down. People, guns going off in your living room. Like it's a weird thing, because when I think back of my childhood, like it was there, but it wasn't real to me, where for you it was clearly very real. And I the only thing, like my father was pretty into corporal punishment. um and there's definitely times where I was black and blue and didn't want to wear shorts or something like that, because my legs were all black and blue. And um there's definitely a self-consciousness of being in my body in that way, was definitely a um probably not too dissimilar from some of your experience. So I definitely know what that's like. But I also had plenty of really safe, positive times to be in my body, and know what that was like, and be able to explore that as a kid. um so I'm curious, were there any moments, just before I go back to the psilocybin experience, was there any moments that that were not so fleeting, other than like the ASMR moments when you were younger, where that you had like a sensory experience, or where you had like a safety in your in your body, like this is my world kind of, when you were a kid? Were there any, or was there always a sense of looming danger?
You know what? Basketball.
Okay.
Been playing basketball, organized basketball since I was a kid. And that was my, you know, I could spend 4, 5, 6 hours running, full court games at the park with my friends, or um, so that was probably the most the the deepest relationship that I had with my body at that point in
Yeah.
my life.
And now it puts you into a sense of like a flow state, like you were just like meditative almost.
Yeah, yeah. And there was also like other little traumas, I guess, or I don't know if you can call it a big trauma, but a lot of unhealthy conversations around my weight and my body image, both in my home, and as kind of like part of the that's very common in I think Caribbean countries, for someone to be like, oh, you look fat, or you weigh too much, or you need to lose weight, or so that was always like a thing since I was like 9 or 10.
So your family
Um,
culture had a I guess a fat shaming kind of mentality.
yeah, I wouldn't call it fat shaming, because it wasn't ever like a deliberate kind of, it wasn't like a bullying that would happen, right? I did experience bullying like out in the world about
Right.
my body, but at home it was more of like a just unhealthy relationship with what, like, those conversations and what that can do to a kid, right?
Hmm.
And so that combination of those conversations, like I weighed like 120 pounds by the time I was like 8 or 9 or something like that. I don't know how much I weighed, but I remember my mom being like I go to the doctor and get weighed, and then she'd like comment about it to other people, like, oh my God, he's like 100 pounds now, or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so it was never meant to hurt. Like, it was never said in that way, but uh, it was now that I'm really in, like, starting to be in my body and understand my relationship with my body, I can like look back and understand what some of my issues have been with like body image and eating and things like that.
That's interesting. Because to some extent I've felt very aware, or conscious, or cognizant of decisions I was making or other people I was making since I was a little kid. My grandfather, really kind of opened me up to this whole other world when I was, very young, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, through his stories that he would tell me. Um, so I feel like I've had, this level of awareness and looking around, and I started coaching kids, and teaching kids swimming, and I was an assistant coach at 15 to a swim team, and then I went on, I was teaching martial arts to kids because I'd been doing martial arts my entire life. And then, eventually I started working with at-risk youth and doing all kinds of other stuff. So like I had a long track record, years of working with kids, and, as early as my early 20s, I'd already been, working with kids. And one of the things that I kind of came to the conclusion of when I was in my early 20s is that, to some extent, no matter what our parents do, you know, we're going to get, screwed up no matter what, because we're going to hear something. Maybe they, in another context to another kid, it wouldn't affect them. It wouldn't, impact them. And there's no way around it. There's no way around us as people hearing, no matter what age, hearing things that are going to affect us, or we're going to latch onto as the right thing to do, even if it's the wrong thing to do, or something that we should do when it's probably not right. You know what I mean? I'm just kind of curious, because now that you're in such a, you work with families, you're doing this work for yourself. You went through this experience. Like, do you see anything wrong with, or I shouldn't say anything wrong, but do you think you could have been protected from like what your mom said kind of thing? Or do you think that was just something that you needed to go through? Like, do you have any thought of the difference between how you felt then versus now? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, because that still happens, right? Like not necessarily with my mom, because I've expressed to her like, hey,
Right.
that doesn't feel good, and she respects that.
Mm-hmm.
But I still go see family in Dominican Republic, right? And they'll be like, man, what's going on? Like, what's up with your gut or whatever, whatever. But I
What's up with
think
yours? I don't know.
and I think the difference is now the self-awareness and the privilege that I've had to be able to build tools for myself to
Mm-hmm.
understand, like, this person's not, most people aren't trying to be like evil or malicious. They just don't know better, right? And
Right.
so I think you're absolutely right in that the things that we go through in life, we're gonna go through things no matter what, right? We can't, and it's not developmentally beneficial to not go through anything, because
Yeah.
you're gonna be in for a surprise, right?
Right. And some might argue, I've definitely argued this before, like we need a certain amount of resistance, and we need a certain amount of not good things to happen to be able to, properly grow and understand, the spectrum that we live in, and have a shot at um being normal or well adjusted, or empathic. Like, you can't have empathy for someone if you haven't experienced anything.
Yeah, I think because you see this, like, as a therapist, right? I see that, right? Because I've had clients who were PhDs and had great childhoods, and
Yeah.
then others that um haven't, right,
Yep.
that I share history with, but I've seen what, as a clinician, what it does to someone when they don't have all of those experiences, or some at least, right?
Yeah.
Where that it helps them be well adjusted to the world and understand that there's going to be these, that the life is chaos, right?
Hmm.
And so if you haven't been able to build the tours or had those experiences, it's really difficult once life starts happening to you for you to adjust to that. I think the difference between when I was younger and what a lot of other kids I see are missing in our communities is the extreme of the experiences, right? That's one thing.
Hmm.
As well as the lack of support. And so trauma, we're all going to experience trauma at some point in our lives, but the way that we either adjust in a healthy way or don't, what determines that is, what does your support system look like?
Right.
And so my parents didn't have the privilege of having an education or having, they were in survival, right?
Yep.
For a long time, even into my adulthood. And so they, even if they wanted to, they couldn't provide that support. Um, I think through my own healing work and through my work with psychedelics, I've been able to, like, to tell my own story to myself and what that narrative looks like. Do I think that some of my experiences have shaped me and have led me to live a life that I enjoy and that I'm grateful for? Yes, but but I wouldn't say like other kids should experience like
Right.
drive-bys at the park so
Right.
that they can maybe, one day have a better adulthood, right? So,
Yeah.
and statistically, that doesn't happen, right? Most, like, I'm an outlier in many ways because of, I got lucky with certain
Statistically
schools.
speaking, yeah. I mean, sure, you're an outlier, but the fact that I mean, they say the weakest a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And if we are a chain, if we are a bunch of people linked together, through our common experience as Americans, then we're only as strong as our weakest link. Well, our weakest link is, people shooting each other because of illegal drugs that, I don't know, maybe if they're illegal, maybe there wouldn't be shootings because it would be regulated. Um, I'm personally, I think everything should be legal. Everything should be regulated, whether it's prostitution, heroin, like, because you can't get rid of anything. Like that's my personal feeling is, and if you want to get rid of something, the only way you're going to get rid of it is remove it from the culture. And the only way you can remove it from the culture is if people have enough support in their life, enough education in their life, that they're going to be able to make choices. And even then, most of the things that people want to get rid of, like prostitution, probably is not going to go anywhere. It's probably still going to exist, maybe to a lesser degree. Maybe heroin addiction would go away, but the use of heroin, it's still going to pop up here and there. And to me, it's all based on what you're talking about, that support. If bad things are going to happen, and bad is relative, for you it was a drive-by shooting while you're playing basketball and you have to get down and then get back up. For someone else, bad may not be getting that game system they wanted. I mean, they don't know any difference. If they have no concept, the worst thing that's ever happened to them is the worst thing that's ever happened to them. And it's going to be, you know, it's so weird, that reality, but that is the reality. Is the worst thing, is the worst thing you've experienced. And yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about, that support, and if your parents had the education or the experience or the community to understand that, oh, this is what Victor went through. We need to do this so that he can integrate and so that he can process and so that he can grow from this. Like, we didn't want this to happen, but now what? And like, it's that now what moment that I think separates, my experience from your experience more than anything else. Like, my experience, my parents had master's degrees in group dynamic and education and early childhood development, and they were teachers. Um, and so when I went through something, they weren't necessarily the greatest at it, but they did their best and they did it with love. And I would say that's a privilege that everyone should have. Like, you know what I mean? Like, in my mind, we didn't have a lot of money when I was a little kid, but we had way more than most in America. I don't think that's quantifiable as a kid, but that love and support to help process and help integrate, even after my dad, I'd catch a beating from my dad, my mom was still there to help me integrate and understand and process the physical and emotional trauma to some extent. You know what I mean? And I know that's the work you're doing now with people. I don't know.
I wanted to, real quick, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I did want,
No.
because I don't want to forget. Yeah, so I think, my parents, when you're in survival, you don't have the capacity, even if you want to be able, like, you're trying, you're in survival to just get your basic needs, and you're carrying a bunch of stuff, from your, they grew up in a completely different environment, literally dirt poor. Like, the home that my mom grew up in had dirt floors, right? And so, but they did try, right? And there's a lot of things so I don't want to make, I guess what I'm saying is, I don't want to make it seem like my parents were completely absent and didn't offer support. I just needed more than that, and more than that what they could offer me at the time.
I mean, so my parents were educated and had the ability to offer me a level of support that most, and it's not, this isn't about, your parents or whatever. I don't think most parents, like the vast majority of parents, have that kind of education that my parents happen to have, with the education and group dynamic and everything that they, I mean, I think I'm an outlier in that experience. You know what I mean? It's like your kids have a father that has experience and has education and training that very, very few parents have. You know what I mean? So I mean, that in and of itself is a whole nother thing. And I don't mean to say that your parents didn't love you or didn't try, or all parents aren't out there doing their best.
But I didn't take it that way, by the way. I just, in case my parents watch, I don't want to.
No, fair. But it's important for parents to know that, like, even if they're doing their best and they're loving their kid, like, there's professional resources out there. Like, if I had experienced, a drive-by shooting in front of me, like, even with my parents' experience, I don't know that they would have been able to give me the support that I needed. And there's definitely things that I wish I would have gotten from my parents, but like, I never told them. They have no idea that I went through, so they had no ability, to give me support in the ways that they might have been capable of, or even if they wanted to reach out to a professional, you know what I mean? Like, because I just didn't tell them. After like 15, I was kind of done telling them anything, So that's a whole nother level of how parents can help their kids. But it's like, I just don't think that people in general, everyone thinks like, oh, we can handle it. It's like, can you though? Like, it used to take a village to raise to raise a child, and now it's a mom, it's a dad, maybe it's a mom and a dad, maybe it's a brother and a sister. There's no village anymore, in America, at least in predominant Western culture.
Yeah, two things. So the first is, I think for us growing up, I mean, that's why I feel such a responsibility too. It's like at the time, let's say I would have witnessed this drive-by shooting, probably didn't tell my mom, right? Because then I wouldn't be able to go to the park.
Right.
But
Yes.
if I
Yeah.
did, and she said, okay, I'm gonna take you to a therapist, which, is far-fetched because my mom didn't speak English and my dad didn't either. And then I go to a therapist that doesn't share my culture and doesn't understand what it's like for me to sit, be at a park and witness a shooting, or having a pregnant woman be killed up the street from my house, or like, um I don't know that would have been, I don't know, right, if it would have been helpful or not to have somebody, but it's even just like the resources weren't even available for us to
Yeah.
be able to do that. And the other thing is that you mentioned about the weakest link, and I just wanted to say that I don't think that the weakest link is that violence that's happening. I think the weakest link is the folks that have the power and the resources to change that, and to move society away from supremacy and oppression, and don't, right? Because of capitalism, because of self-interest and all of those things. um
Yeah, it's better for the bottom line if if there's a large striation between haves and have-nots. Like there's more money to be made when you have uh, hatred, division, and fear. And so, I mean, I don't think capitalism is inherently evil in any way, shape, or form. However, people who don't have any um, empathy, I don't know, maybe, or they're just greedy, are going to figure out, and they have figured out, that by using fear and division, you're going to sell more. You're going to, create, uh, a marketplace that is extremely powerful and destructive all at the same time. But it's a faster way to make money than if everyone's happy and has what they need. Because why are they going to go and buy anything if they're happy, well adjusted, and have what they need, and they're not, feeling like they lack anything?
yeah, I don't, I think that capitalism inherently um incentivizes the exploitation of other people, um, for their labor or for whatever, right? And so it's almost like it's made to reward greed, right? Or it does reward
It,
greed,
it
like I
makes
would
it
say.
easy to reward
Yeah,
greed,
yeah, yeah.
because if you're focusing on the bottom line, if you're focusing on gains, then it makes it very easy to reward the worst aspects of human behavior, and the worst aspects of community. um yeah. Okay, so we've gotten a little bit off.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we could do 2 hours on the benefits and evils of government and capitalism and other economic systems, because there's, things wrong with all of the economic systems, but there's also things good with them. So, um, getting back to that personal experience. So when you did psilocybin, you had this experience, you took half, an hour later you took more because you were feeling it manageable in your body, and it sounds like you stayed with it here in your body. Was it all bliss? Was there shadow? Was there darkness? Was it just bright light? What, like, how did that happen? Like, how would you say you navigated yourself through that experience?
Yeah, it was positive, man. I didn't have I don't I might have cried, but there's the crying was like a something that felt okay and felt
Like
good.
release.
Yeah. There was this moment where I was like under the covers, and the way that the sun was shining in and the covers that I had over me, I had this experience of like being back in the womb. Uh and Yeah, but for the most part, like I had like Bob Marley and the Wailers like playing in the background, and um it was really positive, and I was talking to myself, right? I was having like a conversation out loud with myself, which often happens, or and just like I remember saying like, this is all bullshit. Like it's all bullshit. It's like all of this shit, like all of these labels, all of these expectations, all of this hate, and like it's all bullshit. Love is what matters. And that's just kind of like what kept coming up for me constantly. And even in like talking to my wife afterwards, I'm like, you don't understand, like it's all about love. And she's like, what? Um, but
Years ago, I wrote down, and I'm trying to figure out like whether this is like a blog post or something more. I don't know, but I wrote down that love is the fuel for consciousness. And I think, all the stories you hear about people taking psychedelics, all the stories when you hear about people doing deep meditation, um, that love, what we call love, that feeling of love, that interconnectedness, that joy, everything encapsulated. I feel like that's the fuel for consciousness. That's what enlivens us. And that's also what I feel is stripped away from us when we have, those I don't know, bad experiences, when whether we're a child or in our 30s. It's like if we feel um disassociated or alone, we're feeling a lack of love, which then makes it harder for us to think, harder for us to get out of our circumstances.
yeah, I completely agree. I think, to quote, I think it's Brene Brown who says like shame is uh it's like, what is it? A connection is the antidote to shame or something like that, right?
I like that.
And when we think about the darkest parts of our reality and our world and human beings, they all operate in a space of disconnection from one another, from spirit, from ourselves. And so love is that connector, right? Like,
Hmm.
um, and if you live in that, if you live in abundance and you live in love, then you feel connected to others. You feel connected to your family. You feel connected to yourself, to the earth, to the cosmos, right? And so life becomes, even when it's hard, if you're connected, if you have support, then you can move through that. So I was watching like, John Oliver talking about harm reduction.
Hmm.
Um, and he talked, and he had this lady on there who I think expressed it beautifully, um, about how we disconnect people who use drugs from society to the point where they have no choice but to use drugs till they're not here anymore.
Right.
By putting them in jail, by isolating them, by not letting them get a job, by, their family kicks them while they're down. And not, I don't want to take away that these things are painful for families sometimes, right? And they have to move
Sure.
decisions they have to make. But yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that love is the fuel for connection, right? And connection is what makes life worth living.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine, we are such creatures of connection. We're so hardwired from just being born and taking, you know, 7 years before we could even probably remotely fend for ourselves, and more realistically in today's world, probably until you're, you know, at least a teenager. So if we can't fend for ourselves for years, then, you know, immediately, you know, connection and who we're connected to is so critical for our survival. And, you know, the more people we have on our team, you know, the better chance for survival we have. And, you know, getting to a place where we could thrive, I feel like, is all about the mentality and the quality of those connections. You know, because if every one of those connections that we have is in survival mode, then, you know, even learning of that thriving is possible, you know, is probably going to be rare. You know, if every single one of your connections is in survival mode, every one of your loved ones is in survival mode. It's like, how are you going to know that there's more, you know, or that you can, you know, as there's the popular saying, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's like, well, how do you know you can pull yourself up if no one around you has ever pulled themselves up? It's like, if it's not in your conscious story or reality or your experience, like, where, you know, not, and I don't mean on TV, because TV doesn't count. Like, it's got to be in your personal story for it to have any sense of realness. I mean, I don't know. Do you agree with that? Do you feel that's the same?
Yeah, my friend always says, like, I don't have boots, right? So how am I going to pull myself up,
Right.
right?
If you don't have
And
boots, exactly.
yeah, and also I think, to the earlier point, I think that though these experiences of disconnection and trauma and loneliness and shame and that we experience, that we perpetuate on our own communities, right, ourselves, because we've internalized them, and then they're perpetuated on us by the broader society, leads to a lot of connections that feel like love, because we've never really experienced what that is, but they're really trauma bonds.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, and yeah, and there's a host of other, like, things that come with that, right? That we don't really ever get to experience that love unless we have some kind of space that allows for us to see what that is, what it really is, and then there's this awakening, right?
So that, to a certain extent, the mushrooms, the psilocybin, gave you the space to explore who you are, how you see the world, and what your experience was, so that you could sort some of it out. Would that be a good way of, you know, saying what it did for you, or it helped you facilitate that space?
Yeah, I think that first experience kind of just showed me what was possible. So, like, I often tell this story about my first experience, and I don't want folks to think that I just had this psilocybin experience and then my entire life changed overnight, and like
Right.
I was happy, like I was still battling depression, and like, afterwards I got better, but I felt I had hope, right?
Mm.
And it gave me this gentle push towards, like, exploring how else can I heal, how else can I awaken, how can I take what I got and bring it to the world, right? Even if it's not giving the world psilocybin, right? Like, how can
Yeah.
I be an extension of what I experienced in the world? And then it put me on this path of so immediately after that, like a few months after that, I started my master's in social work, which, I'm a systems thinker, I think, by nature. And so then getting the knowledge behind, like, intergenerational trauma and systemic oppression and all of these different like models and concepts that I could make sense of my own experience and the experience of others, I think helped me integrate that experience even more and learn tools of like, how can I take this really beautiful experience and use it in my work to be able to kind of catalyze that change in others as well, or show others the possibilities, right, that we have to
Which
heal.
I think is amazing, honorable and admirable. And I mean, did you have any sense that that's what you were going to do prior to psilocybin? Like, did you have any sense that you were, going to, part of your healing, for your personal healing of trauma and depression, was going to go and learn how to heal other people? Um, I mean, did you have any clue that that was on your horizon?
Yeah, I was already on that path. I think I
Okay.
had enough self-leadership. And that's like an internal family systems, right? But like, the self is the core of you. And I've always had this voice inside of my head, very faint at times, sometimes very loud, too loud. That was like, you have a purpose and you're here to do something bigger. And like working with other folks and empowering them and advocating just felt natural to me. And so I was already on the path of going
Mm-hmm.
into like my master's degree. I had no idea at the time of what that experience and then that education following that, what what that meant for my life
Right.
and my own journey. But I had a feeling throughout the entire time, from transitioning jobs in 2013 and quitting my job in business and going in, I knew that through community and through me kind of throwing myself into supporting others, that there was a parallel process there. I wouldn't have been able to articulate it at the time,
Right.
and it probably would have sounded, 90% I think of social workers have trauma. And so a lot of, when you talk to therapists, psychologists, social workers, a lot of them will say like, I wanted to help people, but underneath all of that, if you dig deep enough, it's like people are trying to figure themselves out.
Yeah.
And that's why they go into the work. So there's this beautiful kind of like unfolding that happens of you doing your own work while you're trying to help others do theirs as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's a saying that hurt people, but there's also the converse of that is, people who've healed themselves heal others. And, you have to go, I truly believe you have to, um, go in, you have to want to heal yourself first before you can heal anyone else. It's kind of like you got to be able to, save yourself before you save someone else. When I became a lifeguard when I was 15, that was like one of the first lessons. You can't save a drowning person if you're drowning. And if you go out there and you try to save someone and they start drowning you, which happens all the time, uh, then you're not good. You're causing two people's lives, not, yours and theirs. And you have to be able to handle them as well as you can handle yourself. And anytime, they're overpowering you, you have to take care of yourself first, which is difficult, to say the least. If you're going to save someone, you have to maybe, push them away from you before you can save them. I have to imagine there's so many tough moments doing your job, where you've need to take a break, so that you can find your footing. So like, how do you do that? Like, how do you deal with such I mean, obviously it's not always super traumatic or super um, rough like that, I'm sure. But in those moments where you're dealing with a family or a person and it's pulling you down, what do you do? Like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's, when I first got into this work, um, I was the lifeguard, like in there, just like trying to pull everybody out, and was drowning myself. And I'm 34 now, and I've been in the field for some time, and I think partly you learn through experience of like, one, I can't save anyone, right? My and I'm still learning this, right? But I think my responsibility, that I choose to take on, right, is to help others realize and empower them to save themselves, right? And I've learned that through trial and error, right? And I've learned it through clinical supervision,
Mm,
mentoring. Uh, and I was having a conversation with someone the other day, but I was a case manager, and I remember, like, as a case manager, like installing someone's cable, right? Like, that's the depth to which I went into my work. It was like, whatever I have to do to make sure this person's okay, I'm gonna
yeah.
do it. Um, and I
It's
remember, like, yeah.
well, hold on, just because that's an interesting thing. You're installing their cable, and like there are people out there that might think that, what do they need cable for or whatever. But in my mind, and I'm curious if if this is right for you or what or why. But in my mind, having cable gives people a break from their life. It can be a negative escape, but it can also be a healthy escape because it's tough to just always been bombarded by your life if you're in survival mode. And so I feel like giving someone cable, like I know this maybe sounds weird, but in my mind, I feel like you giving them cable is kind of like a powerful drug because it gives them the ability to take a break from life for a minute. And I don't know, does that is,
Yeah, this particular um situation, um the person was completely isolated from
mm,
everyone, right? Completely, and was not ready or willing, to get the help that they needed to deal with the issues that they were dealing with. So it, it it felt right for me to do that, and I felt okay.
so it
But
also
there,
built a bond between you and the person too then. So it wasn't just giving them a something to make their life a little bit, give them a little bit of hope, but it also built a bond, and it was also a bridge between you and them.
yeah, it definitely did. And because it's a different, when I'm in my community, the relationships that I build with the folks that look like me, that are from my community, they have to be deeply rooted, or there's no trust, right? And so I
Right.
always tell people, like, we're trained, like, as a social worker, you're trained, like, if you go into someone's house and they offer you a cup of coffee, you're supposed to turn it down. But if you go into, like, a older Latina, like, grandmother's house, and you're trying to help them with case management, and you turn down the food that they cooked or their coffee, you might as well just turn around, pack your stuff, and leave, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
I think,
that's why
yeah.
would they tell you to turn it down though?
Well, there's a bunch of, it's when you look at the ethical code of conduct, it's all about, like, can that be seen as a gift, or can that be seen, like, you got to remember that these ethical standards weren't written by our communities, right? So there's no awareness
There's no
around.
cultural awareness. It's
Exactly. Yeah.
because like so if I'm going into a home as a as a salesperson kind of thing, and they offered me a beverage, like I almost have to take it if I ever expect to make a sale, you know and so it's strange to me that, like, because life is sales, you know what I mean? Like, the only reason why we're talking is because I told you a story and you told me a story and we bought each other's story. You know what I mean? Like, so in a crude way, I think everything is sales, and the first thing we buy of anyone is their story. And if we don't buy that, ain't nothing else coming. You know what I mean? There is no help, there is no insurance or products or whatever else coming after it. It's yeah. So I can't even wrap my head around why a code of conduct like that has been made, because humans, we need to know we can trust each other. And if we can't break bread or share, uh, at the very least, share water, like, I feel like sharing water, like, that's the most primal thing ever.
Yeah, I think it's an overcorrection, right? Because there's like I've had, moms and grandmas like pack me like chicken in a bag and be like, here, take this, right? Like, and so they try to like draw these boundaries so it doesn't turn into a situation where potentially it could be seen as you exploiting a client or someone you're working with.
Yeah, and I get that.
But I
There's got to be a balance.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I tell people like, no, I was drinking six cups of coffee a day when I was seeing clients. Like that's just what it was. But I wanted to two things. So like with the cable situation, you had asked me like, how do I deal with that situation? And what I realized was eventually through my work is that I installed this person's cable. And this is just an example. I have no
Hmm.
regrets about doing that. But in other situations where you step into that level with a client, right? Or with a person that you're supporting, it's like I did this for him. Can he do it for himself when I'm gone?
Mm.
Right. And am I doing this person a disservice because I want to feel good that I did something good for them and that I helped them, by instead of empowering them to figure out what resources they can go find or how can they find that support to be able to do that, and I just do it for them. How is that helpful? um
There's
so
also got to be, I mean, on your part, or for people like you, I have to imagine that you have to be able to discern in the moment, or do the mental calculations in the moment to figure out, you know, what's going to get the best results. Because on one hand, you you show them how to do it, or you do it for them, um, and it may build a bridge, it may open up a whole relationship, and create a space for him to be able to want to get that change, want to get that growth, want to get that, whatever. um where if you just say you can do this, I don't know that it builds anything. So, I mean, but maybe there is a situation where they're capable, and so it's more that they need an activity, and you're taking that away from them. So, okay, so that would be maybe the other side. But you have to be able, I would think you have to be able to make that mental calculation in the moment, and that's just part of the job.
yeah, it's something you learn, right? With experience, you learn how to discern like how much should I step in here? Like how much of a push does this person need? And making sure you're dealing with your shit so that you're not coming in and trying to like put out fires, right? Or like be
Yeah.
the problem fixer all the time.
Well, it's like you
Um,
said, do I just want to feel good by doing something? And that's part of dealing with your own shit. That's part of, your own personal growth, where I don't need to do this to feel good. I'm doing this because my mental math says this is going to be the best, for him in the long term. I mean, I'm assuming that's part of your process.
yeah, like in that situation, right? It was like I look back at it now and I think it's just a representation of how far I was willing to go. And
Hmm.
sometimes I'm still willing to go for like people that I work with. But in certain contexts, like that's not a healthy thing. That's
Right.
not a healthy way to step in. And I've learned over time how to be discerning in that and how to navigate that. Um, and yeah, it's part of the skill building, right? I
Hmm.
think to be able to decide, like, okay, I went to this woman's house and she offered me a coffee and maybe she cooked some plantains and some rice and beans,
Which sounds really good.
and I eat with them. Yeah, yeah. All right. And I eat dinner with them and it's cool, but
I think I'm
you
losing you.
give a little,
I lost you for a second. So rewind to you eat dinner with them and then
yeah, so you have to be able to discern where's the line here. And then sometimes that line doesn't look the same as the line that's been prescribed to you
right.
when you're working with the communities that I work with.
And
But
different from family to
also,
family.
yeah, and but also being discerning in that and understanding like where does, so yes, I'll take the coffee and maybe I'll eat dinner with you this time and we'll build a relationship, but like I can't take like your groceries home, right? Like that
Right.
you're trying to give me. So
Right.
it's like learning that balance. And but there's enough trust built that now when you say no, that person will understand and won't
Right.
take it personally, rather than you just coming in with this like really hard wall up. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is because you mentioned sales, and I used to, so throughout college, I worked at Radio Shack, right?
Hmm.
So I sold phones. This is Radio Shack, like in its last few years. So from
Yeah.
like 2008 to like 2011. And, I got trained there and I felt really cool, like with the people that I worked with and my boss and everything. And I remember I made this shift at some point from like selling to people and just building relationship with them. So like, the when you're in sales, they teach you like, oh, how to plug, like if someone buys a phone now, you got to sell them a case, and you got to sell them like the car
Uh,
mount, and
the
you got to
upsell.
an extra but I was like, first of all, I don't feel like, if I have a relationship with this person and I know they don't need an extra car charger, I'm not going to sell it to them so I can get a couple percentage points off of
Right.
like the commission. What I did do is learn how to build relationship with people. So I would say, hey, this is what you need. And even if they ask for the extra charge, I'll be like, I don't really think you need that. If you want it, okay, but you might not need it. And sometimes I would make a bunch of commission and sometimes I wouldn't make any. But
Yep.
eventually that way of approaching my work led to me being the top salesperson in my district, right? And like people would come in the door and say, "Where's Victor?" And if I wasn't there, they turn around and leave, right? So, um, and I brought that up one time to someone in a psychedelic space, right? We were talking about what if a client shows up for a medicine session, right? They're ready for their dose session, and then they
Hmm.
change their mind. And I told them like I think, and I gave an example of like sales, and I was like, when you just let people make their own choice, support them, and people sometimes just getting that helps them move past the
Yeah.
barrier of not wanting to do it. And someone got offended by that because I was comparing it to sales, but I was like, it's not that I'm saying that we're selling something here, but I'm just giving you an example of how I was able to, even in a situation where it seems transactional, to build like relationship with someone to the point where if they were iffy about something, the fact that I didn't put the pressure on them to try to move forward with that was enough for them to make their own choice and trust you enough to move forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone has a bad experience with the salesperson. Like, to some extent, like I will, depending on the day, I will rail against the idea that I'm a salesperson or do sales or anything like that. Um, because because of that negative connotation that goes along with it. But I don't think in reality there's anything wrong with it. I mean, I do think sales is life. I do think the only reason why we ever have a relationship with someone is because they've bought into us. They're buying into us as a human being. And the only way we buy into anyone as a human being is there's something in the way they tell their story. There's something in the way they carry themselves. There's something in the way, that they share who they are in all of these spoken and unspoken ways that we want to buy into. And you can compare it to the stock market. You can compare it to sales. You can compare it to all of the things that make up the capitalistic, kind of society, because I think that's the reason why capitalism can work. You can also talk about, socialism, communism, and all the other economic systems and governance system, dictatorships, and everything. There is a part of giving and taking of the human experience is found in every single one of those models. And if it works, then that's the the good side. And if it doesn't work, then that's the bad side, and there's bad sides to everything. And in my mind, allowing someone the agency to know what's right or wrong for them, like, that's kind of everything. Like, if we can't listen to ourselves and say, no, I don't want to get on that elevator. No, I don't want to take this job, or I don't want to take this medicine. If we can't listen to ourselves and trust ourselves, then how are we supposed to trust anyone else? And so you giving them the space to trust themselves makes it possible for them to trust you, whether they then follow through or not. I mean, that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, and I had people tell me no, and then just the fact that I would respect that boundary would then, when they did decide, they're like, I feel comfortable going back to this person. And if you take sales away and you strip everything down to the basics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Negative experiences with salespeople are usually a lack of respect for boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
Manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
and unethical use of the power dynamic,
Yep.
because you're going to this person who has more knowledge than you about phones, cars, whatever,
Right.
and trying to trust them to give you the best advice, and they're thinking about themselves,
Yeah.
right, and their commission.
Yep.
So if you're able, I think it's a lesson in learning how to navigate those things in an ethical way where it's mutually beneficial, but you're still honoring the other person's dignity and respecting their boundaries, and recognizing that you have power in that situation, and how to
Mm-hmm.
ethically use that with transparency and honesty and care for the other person that's in front of you.
Yeah, I think that's so important. That's kind of everything. I feel like that's just life, though. I mean, that should be life. That should be how we come at everything. From friends to dating to job to, everything. I feel like that's the um having a mindful awareness of, who has the power, where it is, and the give and take and the respect. Um, just to take it back, make it a little bit more personal, the coping mechanisms that we were talking about earlier, like, how do you deal with um, some of the intense situations that you have to deal with? How do you safeguard yourself? Like, do you have any specific practices, um, and have they changed at all over the years, or especially since your first psilocybin experience? Like, what do you do to check in with yourself to make sure you're okay? And do you have a meditative process? Do you have a breathing exercise? Is it basketball? Is it a combination of things? Talking with your wife. Like, what do you do, and what can you do, especially because I'm sure there's confidentiality in some of this stuff. So, like, how do you navigate that personally?
Yeah, I think it's definitely therapy. I
Mhm.
have a therapist, and I joke sometimes that I have like 3 or 4 therapists, because I have like clinical supervisors that are therapists, right? So
Mhm.
it's like this mixed relationship of teaching and helping process. I also have like a very wonderful, beautiful community of people that I've built over the years through my experiences and through life, that I reach out to when I say like, hey, I'm not doing good, or I need to cry, or like
Hmm.
this is going on and I don't know what to do, or I just need you to hear me out so I can like say this out loud and process it. Um, the other things that I do is I work out. I do hot yoga, meditation. Like I'm still in the process of being like getting an actual meditation practice that's consistent. Um, but the other thing is like through my work, my continued work and through healing with medicine and whatnot, it has showed me how to like receive something from someone and then let it, and this is crucial especially for therapists and for people who hold stories, right?
Mm.
Because the stories that we hear are terrifying and can cause like vicarious trauma, right?
Hmm.
Like when you're dealing with a 9-year-old kid who was like sexually abused by their grandparent or by someone, their
Someone in
uncle,
their family, yeah.
yeah, like those things, like if especially when you're starting out in this work, they like make you hyper vigilant for about every situation. Like you don't want your kids to go sleep over anywhere, you don't want them, like you start to try to protect them from that.
Right.
um so but I've learned through my own work, right? And part of the psychedelic experience is learning how to surrender, but also learning how to like receive whatever comes up and let it move through you, feel it in the moment, be present with it, and then release it, right? And
Mm.
so that practice as a therapist is very important, or as a healer or empath, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
It's like, hey, I'm here with you, I hear you, um I can support you to the point where I'm capable of, holding myself and you,
Hmm.
and and then letting that go through you, right? Letting it flow back into the earth. It's like I can't be effective as a friend or as a therapist if I'm holding on to all of these different, very like, sad and terrifying experiences that are shared with me. So do I hold them in my consciousness, and do I remember the stories and I put them on a shelf somewhere in my brain and they're there and I remember them and I empathize with them, but I don't go to sleep at night thinking about what was told to me, because eventually it'll just eat me away.
Yeah. Oh, I would imagine. And like, yeah, I mean, just some of the work that I've done, like not nearly as involved as the work you do. And I definitely have to do some clearing, I go work out or what have you, or meditate or do something to kind of let go of, some of the stories that you hear or see. Um you you said you did yoga, hot yoga. I'm curious, how do you compare that experience? Because I feel like hot yoga can be a very psychedelic experience. It can take you out of your world or put you into your body in a way that is far exceeds your quote unquote normal sensory perception. It's an altered state of consciousness. So do you have a similar experience like that with hot yoga? I can't imagine it. I'm the only one that experiences that. And how does that help you process what your work, personal life, and everything else?
Yeah, it feels, meditation is about letting go of thoughts, right? And just
Hmm.
letting them kind of go. I wouldn't say it's like that for me, even though it is a moving meditation experience for me. It's more of like journaling for
Hmm.
me. When
That's really
I'm
interesting.
Yeah, it's like, um whatever's coming up for me. If it's sometimes I get caught up in thought.
Oh,
Sometimes I need to come back to my body and to my breath, like when it's getting overwhelming. And my relationship with yoga, like so today was my 99th class since 2016, so
nice.
it's been like on and off until like the last 3-4 months. It's been like more consistent, and like my relationship changed with yoga when I realized like this is a spiritual practice.
Yeah,
It's
can
not
be.
just working out in the morning. And so I've had like openings, like spiritual openings in the yoga room where I've had to like leave because it's too much, or like just lay there for,
Yeah.
45 minutes. Um so yeah, it's very much I think when I had the moment where I realized, like, I experienced kind of like a altered kind of psychedelic experience in yoga, and it was so overwhelming to realize like that what it was, that I couldn't even like handle it.
Yeah.
And this happened like last month, or like I just got up and I was like, I gotta go. And then I told my yoga teacher later on, like, yeah, I had some kind of like spiritual opening and I just couldn't stay. Um, but yeah, I definitely see it as like um, as another way to tap into source.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the definition of yoga is connection. So I think a more accurate definition of yoga, I believe, is connection. And so all yoga, whether it's like a physical practice or whether it's, like a bhakti yoga or uh, Ghana yoga, Ghani yoga, karma yoga, like I believe all of the different types of yoga are just different types of connection. And so, like, my understanding is that anything and everything can bring you is yoga and can bring you to a higher spiritual experience. Um, and like I've done a soul cycle class before. Soul cycle is like a spin class. I went for a friend's birthday. She was doing like a fundraiser, charity event, at a soul cycle. So you buy the soul cycle and then all proceeds go to charity. And I had one of like the most profound kind of experiences in that soul cycle, where I went on a couple journeys. I was not in that room and I had no idea I was going to have that experience. I thought I was just going to get a workout, and ended up going to other dimensions. It was a wild experience. Uh, and to some extent, oh, are you there? Are you
Yep,
there?
I'm still here.
Oh, okay. Uh, I'm getting like a weird feedback all of a sudden. Um, Anyways, to some extent, there it was. The reason why we're talking now is because of that soul cycle, and that was like 8 years ago, and I didn't know what to do with that meditative spiritual experience at the time. I just took note of it, literally took notes, drew pictures, and was trying to figure out how to um, make that part of my life. Or because one of the things that came out of it was the idea of one earth, same air and water. So the idea that we're all on this rock together, whether we like it or not, and we all drink the same water and breathe the same air, whether we like it or not. And we now know, that the color in the Amazon rainforest is changed because in Africa the desert blows up winds that crosses the ocean, and that desert yellow will actually coat the Amazon rainforest. So like, that's the perfect example of, breathing the same air and, same water circulates. But that was like one of the moments that I had. And so there's a logo now on every single one of my videos of same air, one earth, same air and water. And it's on every single one of my videos now. Um, and I was trying to figure out how to get that idea out there, and so this is part of getting that idea out there. Like every conversation starts from, we're on the same planet together, we breathe the same air and we drink the same water. I just feel like that changes the context of every business decision, community decision, personal decision. Like, we're in this together, like it or not.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I share that. Like, I feel like Earth is one big organism, right?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I had something else I wanted to share, but I'm neurodivergent, and so like I'll probably remember when we're wrapping up. Like, oh, I was gonna say this.
Well, it'll come back to you. And if it doesn't come back to you, we can always do a round two. Um, so just to get back on those kind of coping mechanisms, prior to your psychedelic experience, you had basketball, you were on the path to getting your master's degree and becoming a clinician. Through psychedelics, through your path, it sounds like you have a whole new tool chest, or toolkit for dealing with your own personal experiences, dealing with other people's experiences. And it sounds like it's also continues to evolve.
Yeah, like I'm still a baby to like the spiritual kind of to life,
Yeah.
right? And
I mean,
and so
I
like
feel
I'm
like we all
always,
are. If we
yeah,
have this human form, we're all babies, you
yeah.
know.
Joe Rogan has this really funny bit where he's like, when I was a kid, I'd say like, I can't wait till I grow up because then I'm gonna have it all figured out. And then he's like, then I'm 26 and someone calls me sir at a supermarket, and he's like, this is fucking it. Like no one knows what's happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just like a continuous learner, and I'm always following what feels okay for me and what feels some. I'm very curious. I'm very hungry for knowledge. I'm very
Hmm.
hungry for connection, and so um, I always I'm looking for new ways for me to take care of myself or things to share with others. I love hiking. I love being in nature. I love um anything that makes me feel okay and that helps me like have space in my mind. I'm open as long as I'm not hurting anyone or hurting
Yeah.
myself. Like, I'm always open to try it.
I mean, my
But so
feeling, uh, like, how do you, because I feel like that's kind of the answer for everyone. Like, if everyone just is open to what might help them relax, help them heal, help them come up with new ideas. Like, if you're just open to new possibilities, I feel like that's kind of everything right there, like, how did you have did you have, is that openness part of this new journey, or do you think that was there 10 years ago?
yeah, I feel like I'm learning how to be what I always was.
Yeah, I love that.
Like that's what I feel like. Like I know that I was always curious. I was always open. I was always seeking spirituality and seeking a place for connection and community. I was always very tuned into others and very and so like I didn't learn these things in graduate school. Like I was already a healer, and
Yeah.
social work kind of just gave language to it or labels to it. But yeah, I'm that's
Well, it's like you
my
organically,
journey is
as
like
a
getting.
salesperson, built relationships with people and knew that that was stronger and going to be better. So, I mean, yeah, uncovering that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that's what it feels like for me. It's like a rediscovering of the core that I lost living, right? Like being
Yeah.
in life. So I've learned new things about myself, or I learn how to be open about a part of myself that I've exiled or hid from the world because
Mhm.
I, some way or another, I learned that it was bad or unwanted, or I was afraid to be rejected for it.
Mhm.
Um, and that's really what this journey has been. So I feel like I've always been this, right? It's more of an unlearning than it is a learning, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. It's more of an unlearning than a learning. I like that. That might actually be the title for the episode. Is there, I feel like maybe we should wrap it up now. And then we can always come back and do a round two at another point. Is there anything that you want to amplify or share with the world? Anything that's going on or coming up, or maybe even just like a message, like be open, whatever. Is there anything like that you can think of? Do you want to share before we end here for today?
Yeah. So if you visit pictureacolorfulworld.com, you'll find the trailer for a film that I'm part of, that I'm working on with the group of friends that I grew up with and other folks in the space who I've connected with and I'm in community with. And the idea of the movie started out between me and my friends and wanting to share ourselves and our unique relationship as men of color with the world, and trying to challenge, like, what is love? What have we been taught is love? What is vulnerability? Why have we exiled it? How can it help us be happier together and uplift each other? And now it's bloomed into this beautiful story. That's with amazing. A bunch of amazing folks involved. So we're currently trying to fundraise the money to be able to do a full feature. And yeah, you can visit pictureacolorfulworld.com, and the trailer's on there, and you can sign up to receive updates as we release more scenes, or we develop or record more footage.
Yep.
As we fundraise.
And I'll make sure to put it in the show notes so people can just hit the link and go right there from the episode.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and the only other thing I'll say, two more things I think is, so I'm a speaker, I'm a consultant, health, a life coach, and also a clinician, a licensed social worker. So I'll be launching my website soon, but
Great.
Folks can find me online at Victor Cabral. If you look for me on like Facebook, or A Wondrous Mind is my handles on the different platforms, Clubhouse. Nice. And the last thing I'll say is one of my favorite quotes is by, I don't know if you've ever seen Mr. Robot before.
I haven't. I heard it's an amazing show though.
Yeah, it's amazing. And there's a point in there where the Philip Price was like this kind of like anti-hero or like villain in the show. He says to the main character, you can't force an agenda, Mr. Alderson. You have to inspire one. And I think that's a quote that I want to keep in mind as we try to like bring these medicines to the world. And
that might be a better title. Can't force an agenda, you have to inspire one. Don't forget to leave a comment or a review. I'd love to hear your thoughts. New episodes every Tuesday. And for short clips from each episode, check out YouTube. Thank you. And don't forget, your life story is yours to write and rewrite as many times as you want.